So Bungie recently released the Marathon Server Slam, just a few days before the game's full release, and people have already shared some very interesting thoughts online.
They definitely made some improvements from the playtest before.
It wasn't good, not a good impression so far.
I don't necessarily think that Marathon's gameplay is enough.
Solid shooting, great visuals, music is really top notch.
At least for me, cool factor, but no substance.
It's very good in some aspects and incredibly bad in others.
For me, Marathon is a little bit too slow for my taste.
Can you release a game that it looks like you even go through the main menu to play it?
$40. Do you buy the game or not at launch? I'm probably at this point at a wait.
Let them cook or you're gonna get Call of Duty 96!
So after loading some matches myself and getting a preview of the game, I wanted to throw my hat into the ring. Were people wrong about Marathon? Is it a hidden gem or is it Concord 3 after all? Let's find out. So before I go really in depth about what I like and dislike about the game, overall I think the game is just fine, really. It's the most whelming okay game I've played in 2026 because whilst there are some highlight features here and there, and I've certainly had some enjoyable moments, there's just a few things with the game that I think just hold it back overall. I can definitely see some people really getting into the game and sort of adopting it as their forever game. There is enjoyment to be had here, and I hope the game gets better over time, but that's the thing. For me anyway, Marathon is that maybe down the line kind of game, you know? It's the type of experience that you would log on to the weekends with your friends to play for a couple of hours before logging off and trying something else. Or perhaps one of those games that you would check up every once in a while, but it isn't really like something you would regularly return to. Especially since we're talking about Bungie here. I mean, look, I've been on that treadmill before with Destiny, and let's just say, never again. There's not really enough here to convince me to spend $40 upfront or on any upcoming DLCs and seasons. It's okay for now, but when there are so many exceptional experiences out there, both current and in the past, then really okay is just not good enough. I hope I'm wrong about Marathon, and I hope they're able to turn things around because I think Bungie desperately needs it. And I think the gaming industry could use the competition, quite frankly, because extraction shooters is such a niche upcoming genre that I think the more high quality games are out there, the better. And maybe it will be a smash hit for Bungie, but for right now, for me personally, I think it's kind of mediocre. With that out of the way, let's start with the positives. When Bungie first revealed Marathon like all those months ago, I was definitely a bit taken aback along with the other people surrounding the overall style of the game. It's a little weird, strange, and quite frankly, I think it's a little all over the place. But when I was actually playing the game, the aesthetic itself actually grew on me. They've opted for a futuristic cyberpunk style with a bit of a classic Windows aesthetic. It's very blocky, very obtuse, a bit abstract, and very bold in its color palette. I was afraid that when it came to like exploration and moment-to-moment gameplay, it would be a bit overwhelming, and while it can be a bit of a visual clutter at times, it's fairly grounded all things considered. And whilst I never really played the alpha, I've heard from other creators that the graphical fidelity overall has made major strides since then. It's certainly unique, I'll give them that. I mean, there are so many games out there that try to opt for the modern military look. They try to look like Rainbow Six, Call of Duty, or Battlefield, or they end up going for like the cartoon route and end up looking too much like Fortnite. And then you just have games like Highguard, which really struggle to find its own identity in the space in terms of visuals. But I don't think Marathon has that issue. It is distinct, even if it isn't really everybody's cup of tea. Like all the in-game cutscenes and NPCs have like this modern art style to them, and while there's probably a lot of meaning behind all the moths and bugs and all the T-posing that you find in the game, I can't really say I understand any of it. And when we're talking about the art direction of the game, it's hard not to think back to the plagiarism incident a few months ago. And aside from feedback, I think that's probably what prompted Bungie to delay the game a few months back in the first place. I mean, they ultimately settled in the end, and whilst Bungie has had a history of doing stuff like this in past games like Destiny, at least at this time around, it's come to a good result. I also really like the social aspect of this game. A lot of the players that I encountered didn't really use their mics this time around, but I really do think Marathon is at its peak when all three players are communicating with one another, because there were so many like mechanics and like tidbits in this game that I learned through other players giving me advice. Like when it came to like certain contracts that needed to be completed, I only ever found out about like where to find them or how to complete them because of other more experienced players showing me the way. It's more so a perk of the extraction shooter genre as a whole rather than something unique to Marathon, but I thought it's something that's worth highlighting nonetheless. And that also goes for when you're fighting enemies as well in the game through proximity chat. Now, that's a feature that Bungie wanted to initially roll back on because they wanted to avoid toxicity in the game, which I think is kind of stupid. I mean, you're creating an online shooter, and not only that, you're creating it in one of the most punishing genres to date. Of course, people are going to be a bit frustrated when they're playing, but titles like Escape from Tarkov and Arc Raiders show that those interactions you have with your teammates and with your enemies is what sort of adds on to the magic of the extraction shooter genre. I mean, in their own promotional material, they showed two enemy teams working together in order to secure loot because they had a common goal. That's just something you wouldn't get without proximity chat. And I actually think the gunplay is pretty solid. It's very akin to Destiny, which is not surprising since they're made by the same developer. It's a bit floaty, but it's still very fun to play. But having said that, I do think it's a little bit too forgiving in terms of its hitboxes. Like, there were definitely instances where I missed somebody, but I was given the hit anyway. There's a good variety of weapons in the game as well, but whilst I didn't get to use all of the weapons, there was like your standard picks like the assault rifle and the double barrel shotgun, but also some quirky choices as well, like an LMG that projects a frontal shield when you aim down sights, or an SMG that locks onto enemies. And I actually like the fact that the game's time to kill is relatively low for PvP. It makes it a little bit more punishing than games like Arc Raiders, so it prevents people from being a bit gun-ho like they would in Call of Duty. I understand it's a bit frustrating when you're on the receiving end of it and it seems like you just die out of nowhere because of some guy in a corner that's basically shot you down because of a sniper, but at the same time, it's like it's the extraction shooter genre. It's sort of meant to be a bit high risk, high reward, and it sort of forces you to like constantly be on edge and to constantly be aware of your surroundings and to slow things down a little bit. After playing a few rounds in Marathon, those are some of the biggest highlights for me personally, but there are also a few downsides to the game as well. And I don't think there's like a single glaring issue that holds back the game necessarily, but rather I think Marathon's suffering from a case of like a death by 1,000 cuts situation where there's a ton of small little inconveniences that just hold back the experience overall. I mean, performance was a frequent complaint that I saw online, especially on the PC front. I mean, I think there was like one creator that I saw that literally had to alternate between a mouse and keyboard and a controller because navigating the UI with the mouse and keyboard just didn't work basically. The fact that this is happening a few days before launch it's kind of concerning. There was also a couple of issues I encountered when playing on the PS5, which was the main platform I was using when accessing the server slam. Like on day one, I was really struggling to find a match. I mean, it was through pure determination that I was able to find a few games in the end. I was also rubber banding on a few occasions. I don't know if that's really an issue with Marathon or more so the connection I had with some of the players that I was teaming up with, but it was happening on more than one occasion. And again, it's a beta test, right? So some technical issues are to be expected, but the fact that this is happening literally a few days out from the game's full release, I just hope they're able to patch them in time is all. The number one complaint by far, you've probably heard this from a ton of other users online or some of your favorite creators, but the UI is a mess. It is a goddamn maze to try and get through it all. And I mean, this is Bungie we're talking about, the developers behind Destiny, and that game didn't really have great UI either because, well, these guys are just obsessed with submenus for some reason. And whilst I mean the UI looks pretty slick, on the other hand, like the usability is just completely down the toilet. You could call it a skill issue, you could say it's not bad, but it's definitely a steep learning curve, especially when there's just so many other games that just do the menus a lot better. I mean, I can see why they call it Marathon. It just takes so long to get anywhere. It's like you have to go through a maze in order to get through your cosmetics, your contracts, and even your upgrades. I mean, I probably spent more time in the menus themselves than actually playing the matches. It just lacks a lot of clarity, I think, and it just doesn't really do a good job of telling you what exactly is in your inventory and what exactly is important, which I think is kind of important in a game all about loot. I mean, with most things, I think it's just something that people will get a bit more used to as they play the game more. But I mean, like, the initial reactions aren't great. And you know it's bad when there's a 7-minute tutorial on how to go through the UI of Marathon. I don't know if it's just me as well, but it's just most of the consumable items just look identical. They're a bit samey. And that's an issue when they're always like so small and they're like tucked away into the corner of your stream. Like, it's hard to differentiate like what exactly each item does. does. And for me, like after a particularly like stressful and high octane like gunfight, I'm basically just operating on autopilot at this point. And when I'm looking through like somebody's loot or through like the loot throughout the world, I'm basically just basing my judgment off of the color, to be honest. Like replacing all the whites with the greens and the greens with the blues and blues with the purples and so on. But I mean, that's just the habit that I've just grown into after playing so many games like Destinies and MMOs over the years. I also want to talk about these shells. Like, I just don't find them appealing at all. I don't like their designs. There's nothing really coherent about them. The designs are all over the place and they're just a bit off, to be honest. I mean, you've got Lego Brickman, you've got Goth Lady Liberty, you've got Dark Chemical Romance, and all these other characters that just don't look great. And it's a shame as well because I think the character abilities are what make Marathon stand out gameplay wise anyway, from like Escape from Tarkov and Ark Raiders. But the fact that these are the characters we have to play, it doesn't really attract a lot of excitement to any upcoming or future shells that will be added to Marathon. I also think their abilities are kind of boring. Now, mind you, I do like that their kits are fairly limited. It's sort of like Apex Legends style in a way, and I think it's desperately needed to ensure that the game isn't as cluttered as it already is. But at the same time though, like a lot of these are fairly generic aside from like the movement abilities. And I mean, like the medic is probably the best one out there, and I say this because it's pretty much the character that most people are playing in matches nowadays. And oh my god, I need to talk about the heat system because it is the most annoying mechanic in this entire game, and I have no idea why it's designed this way. It's sort of like a stamina system that builds up as you sprint, slide, and use movement abilities, and when it goes to full, you basically suffer a movement penalty where you're basically relegated to just walking around. It's just not fun to play with at all, and it's just overbearing for no reason whatsoever, because encounters in this game are few and far between, so you're going to be spending most of your time just running around anyway, and these maps are pretty big, so between POIs, most people are going to be sprinting and then walking, and then sprinting, and then walking again. And it sort of makes sense why it's here, because in the middle of gunfights, you don't want people just constantly sliding or jumping around, because that's fairly like frustrating to play against, and it's usually something you'd find in an arena shooter where things are a lot more faster paced, rather than an extraction shooter where you're encouraged to take things a little bit slower. But since there really isn't any other way to traverse through the map without just like taking out your knife and running a little bit faster, I don't see a good reason why it can't be a system that goes into effect during a gunfight exclusively. I'm also not a big fan of the PvE variety in this game. There's like one faction which is like the UESC, and like even then, like the enemies in that faction alone aren't really enough to make gunfights feel distinct and unique from one another. And it's disappointing as well because like these are the people that made Destiny, and when that game released back in 2014, that game released with like multiple factions, and it just doesn't make sense that in a world that's so expressive, like the enemies in the game are so one-dimensional. Like maybe they'll add more in the future, or maybe there'll be extra factions down the line, but right now PvE isn't really all that exciting. That being said, these guys do not go down easily, especially the shield guys. Like, it takes at least multiple magazines to take them down. They spot you very easily, and their aim is a lot better than mine, and I'm willing to wager a lot better than yours. But I do understand the sentiment that it's a bit jarring to go from PvP, which has relatively low time to kill, and then to shift over to PvE, which are basically filled with bullet sponge enemies. Again, with most games there's good and bad, right? But Marathon desperately needs a win. Marathon has reached an all-time peak of 140,000 players, and while it isn't the highest we've seen, it's not terrible either. But there's arguments to be made about like how it is fairly underwhelming compared to its immediate competition, which is, well, Ark Raiders. I mean, that game is just a special case anyway, because it's just had such a strong hold on its players, and because that just speaks to the quality of the game itself. And I think that's just something that Marathon is going to struggle a lot with unless it can bring in some major changes and bring in some huge updates further down the line. Because while these numbers are fine, you still have to bear in mind that this is free to access. When it launches and there's an upfront cost, it's going to be another challenge entirely to try to bring those players back. It's not impossible, we've seen high player counts for fully priced games before, but there's just a lot riding on Marathon at this point where it needs to be better than okay, it needs to be exceptional. that game has pretty much been left in the dust in order to ensure that Marathon succeeds. There wasn't really a ton of excitement for the game when it first launched, and I think that's due to a couple of factors. A, the overall fatigue surrounding live service, and B, the overall like declining reputation of Bungie as a studio known for like removing paid content and going through like a recent layoff of staff. On top of the whole plagiarism incident, and it's fair to say that Marathon basically started off on the wrong foot. But in 6 months, like Marathon has been able to turn the conversation around entirely, and now there's more people defending it and trying to say that Marathon will not end up as Concord 3. Because I think the service line was probably the best decision they could have made, because they probably won over a few players who are on the fence about whether or not they should have played it or not. There's also some upcoming features after the game fully launches, like a ranked mode. But as with most live service games, it's going to be a matter of how the game evolves over time that will truly define whether or not it is a success. But for me though, it's just an okay game. And that's a shame when there are just so many other titles out there that offer exceptional and memorable experiences. Like there are some good titles that I missed before 2025 that I will look to play instead of this. And not only that, there are other games coming out in March that I'm really looking forward to play, like Crimson Desert. Those are just my thoughts on Marathon. I could be wrong about it and it ends up becoming the smash hit that ends up digging Bungie out of the grave, but only time will tell really. Thanks for watching, and as always, take care.